What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my video on the Bard class in Baldur's Gate 3 ahead of its launch, where I have been covering all the classes relatively in depth, but less so in terms of number crunching and more about their class fantasy as well as their general game mechanics. And with that in mind, when it comes to Bards, a surprising amount of that was transferred directly into the game, so this one could roughly serve as a guide to playing 5th edition D&D as well, as that is the system we are using here, but do know I'm not covering a ton of things like the specific math, and we'll save that for things like build videos. But broadly speaking, before we dive into this, bards as a class are very, very versatile. They're able to do a ton of things proficiently, even if they aren't quite the best at it. And that is in addition to being able to support your party at the same time. And because of that, bards can fill a variety of roles. So with that in mind, let's actually talk about what the class fantasy of a bard can be. So first up, an important distinction about what a bard is. Throughout the Forgotten Realms, our world setting, you can find all sorts of performers. Almost none of them are what is considered a bard. A bard is an individual through either natural talent or a bargain of some sort potentially, which may or may not be exaggerated in great detail, is nonetheless capable of bringing out the magic in both music and vocals. Things like turning a simple song into a magical effect that makes people more pliable in social situations, or turning simple words into real damage caused to someone, causing words to in fact hurt you. So when you talk about a bard in D&D, it's not enough to simply say a performer, because there are many performers. Bards are people who very specifically weave magic into their music and voice. And that in and of itself requires both a natural talent to do so, on top of the ability to learn and find hidden knowledge where it might be otherwise concealed from most everyone else. Specifically in music most of the time, which means that as a spell focus, bards typically use their own instrument, and they are in fact full spellcasters. If we were to take them all the way to level 20, they would get 9th level spells. However, with the level cap in Baldur's Gate 3 only being 12, we will ultimately get 6th level spells. Now the nice thing about the class fantasy of a bard is that much like the class itself, it's incredibly versatile. Beyond what I just told you, the rest is really up to you, down to the instrument you use, the way you choose to convey your music, and how you present your character to the world can all come into play. For instance, while a lot of people might think of a more theatrical performer when it comes to bards, because of their many skills, it's very much so possible for a bard to be more of a warrior who uses war chants as the basis of both their music and thus their magic. And while I am well aware many people really love to play this class in a way that's, let's say, very romantic in nature, especially with their high charisma stat, there's a lot more you can do with this thematically. And thanks to the many skills that are available to them, as well as the many avenues of approach they have to things, while they might not be as good at a specific thing as another class, they are quite good at almost everything. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some general information to know about bards in terms of proficiencies and stats. So ability score wise, you want to have really high charisma, as that is both our casting stat as well as the basis for many of our other abilities, and then the next highest would typically be dexterity. This is not a hard requirement, and there are a few ways to build a bard that focuses more on strength, but in most cases, dexterity is usually the way to go. At a base level, bards are proficient with light armor, simple weapons, a hand crossbow, long swords, rapiers, and short swords. However, thanks to some of their subclasses and things, they can get access to other proficiencies pretty easily, but that is what is available to the base class. Now from there, let's talk a little bit about their spellcasting. They don't have to prepare their spells, they can simply use the ones that they know, provided of course they have available spell slots to do so. However, probably the main thing to know here is that while it is very much so possible to be an offensive spellcaster with a bard, many of their spells are more like illusions and enchantments and general support and utility. They do have a few offensive options, but not nearly as much as say a wizard or a sorcerer. Much of their magic, as you might imagine, is typically based towards sound-oriented spells, things that affect language, your ability to talk to certain things, spells that are just generally very loud, like Thunderwave. So while I would say they make, for the most most part better support casters than a primary spellcaster or damage spellcasting, they can absolutely be offensive with their spells. In fact, they are best known for something like Vicious Mockery, one of their cantrips, which uses the magic of their insults to both damage an enemy and also give them disadvantage on their attack rolls. But as they are full spellcasters, you can absolutely make very good use of the many spells available to them. Just don't expect to be hurling fireballs or shooting lightning from your fingertips in most cases. Next up, I want to talk about one of the big Bard abilities, which is Bardic Inspiration. As a bonus action, so in addition to whatever else they do that turn, it's possible for a Bard to use their music to inspire someone. This will give them a extra 1d6 on their next attack roll, ability check, saving throw, whatever. You throw a d6 and you add that as a bonus. Though in order to use this on someone, they do have to be within range, which is about 60 feet, and then they also need to be able to hear you. You'll be able to do this a few times per day based on your charisma modifier, and then it's reset when you take a long rest. As you level up, this becomes more effective. At 5th level, it turns into a d8. At 10th, it turns into a d10. And for BG3, that's all you need to know, as our level cap is 12. But remember, this is a bonus action, so typically a bard will be able to do something else and then also inspire someone on their own turn. This inspiration ability is a huge part of what bards are all about, and it naturally comes up a good bit here and there in other places as well for their subclasses, so we'll wind up talking about this a bit more once we get to that point. But always remember, a couple of times per day at least, a bard will be able to give someone a potentially very sizable bonus to something they are doing. From there, let's talk about the rest of their class mechanics. First up, we have Jack of all trades. So this will affect the skills that your character is not proficient in, basically giving you half of the bonus you get on the skills you are proficient in. Bards, much more so than other characters, get a lot of skills with which they can gain proficiency, which is one of the reasons they make a great face character, or that is to say the one doing all the talking. For the person that will be rolling these checks, bards have huge bonuses to many of them, and Jack of all trades ensures that they always have a bonus to something, because any skill that they are not proficient in, they will get half of their proficiency bonus rounded down as a bonus anyways. And the next level, level 3, actually takes this a step farther, with expertise. Expertise will allow you to choose 2 of your skill proficiencies, and your proficiency for that is doubled, basically showing that you are really, really good at that thing. And then at 10th level, you'll be able to choose another 2 skills to do this with, which makes bards very, very good at passing all sorts of ability checks. However, also at 2nd level, we get Song of Rest, which is a little bit changed from the tabletop version. In Baldur's Gate 3, this effectively just gives you another short rest for the day, but in the tabletop version, this allowed you to restore more health during a short rest, so it works a little bit differently. Now at level 5, we will be gaining Font of Inspiration. This will allow us to restore our Bardic Inspiration whenever we short rest in addition to a long rest, which basically means we get to give people that large buff even more often, which is pretty helpful. And then at 6th level, they pick up Counter Charm. As an action, we can start a performance that allows us and friendly creatures within 30 feet to get advantage on saving throws against being frightened or charmed, which basically means it's much more difficult to frighten or potentially charm all of the characters in our immediate vicinity, though it will cost you an action to do this. That is compared to a paladin who can get something similar for no action, basically. But still, in certain situations, very useful. Though this does require those creatures to be able to hear you, and if you get silenced or incapacitated, this stops working. Then at 10th level, we pick up Magical Secrets. Bards are able to learn about magic from a wide spectrum of what magic is. This enables them to choose 2 spells from any class, including your own, a bard, and they are added to your spells known. In the tabletop version, you would get a few more of these, but again, with our level cap of 12, we're only going to get this if we take Bard all the way to level 10. Pretty much the only requirement here is that it must be of a level you can cast, which means, again, in the name of versatility, Bards are very, very good at a little bit of everything. Now from there, we'll wrap this up a bit by talking about subclasses. Subclasses for a Bard are their colleges. You see, Bards, by their very nature, are a very socially oriented type, and in order to preserve the traditions that they've studied and discovered, they form what they call colleges, which are sort of loose organizations of bards. bards. Joining one of these colleges will give you access to some unique features which help you dive even further into some forbidden or potentially just hidden knowledge. In Baldur's Gate 3, we will ultimately have access to 3 of these, one of which is not in early access, but 2 of them are Lore and Valor, and then the third one is Swords. The College of Lore is all about leaning into that versatility. You will gain proficiencies in even more skills on top of the ability called Cutting Words. This will allow you to also use your Bardic Inspiration to apply a debuff to enemies, basically shaking their confidence where you would rather inspire your friends. So at the cost of Bardic Inspiration uses, you can debuff enemies instead of just buffing allies. This will also give you access to a couple more magical secrets once you hit level 6, which makes College of Lore a pretty decent way to go if you want to purely be a support character. However, we have 2 more options, both Valor and Swords. It is an odd inclusion to have both of them, because generally speaking, Swords is just considered superior to College of Valor because both of them are more martially focused colleges. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some home rule tweaking here once we actually see College of Swords, or maybe just even to College of Valor on the actual launch version. But both of these are going to give you armor proficiencies, martial weapons, and extra attack at level 6. But the difference is College of Swords gives you access to an ability called Blade Flourish and a fighting style, which has to be either dueling or 2-weapon fighting, which is to say dual wielding. So you're going to get a bonus to just one of those 2 types of fighting by being a College of Swords bard, but Blade Flourish will allow you to make a specific type of flourish, either defensive, slashing, or mobile, all of which will give you extra damage to the attack itself, but then a secondary benefit such as extra AC, hitting more than one creature within 5 feet of you, or allow you to use your reaction to move a little bit farther afterwards. So because of those things, College of Swords is generally the better way to go. Really the only way you wouldn't want to take College of Swords is if you didn't want to use a scimitar specifically, as that is required here, but it will allow you to use any weapon you're proficient in as your spell focus. Whereas the College of Valor will literally get all of your martial weapon proficiencies. So College of Valor allows you to focus on more weapons in general, which could potentially be the benefit there, with the other big change being that Valor gets access to Combat Inspiration, which allows them to buff others as well as themselves, specifically the weapon damage rolls. Though as an alternative, it can also add that Bardic Inspiration to that character's AC as well. So Valor is a little more open and allows you to buff others in some of the ways that College of Swords will allow you to buff you, but if you're making a martially focused bard, College of Swords in this case will usually be your best option, outside of just maybe really wanting to use a greatsword or something. All that to say your subclasses are basically the option of more skills and spells, or 2 options more suited to martially focused characters. That said, let's actually talk about playing a bard. As I mentioned a few times here, bards are really great at versatility. There is very little roles that they can't fill in some capacity, so whatever you might need in a moment, there's a chance a bard might be able to do it for you. As they are full spellcasters, they have the potential to do quite well in melee combat. Depending on their subclass, they can pass a surprising number of ability checks thanks to all their proficiencies, and thanks to their naturally high charisma and all their proficiencies, they make an incredibly great face character, or the one doing all the talking. And thanks to things like Bardic Inspiration and simply their spell list, they also make a great support character or a support spellcaster in combat. So they can fill a wide variety of roles. They're usually not the best at any individual one of those roles, but they can do many of them. Also, I would be remiss if this video didn't include a note on performance. Baldur's Gate 3 is going to allow bards to make a performance check, or at least be much better at it, with any of their instruments. And seeing as how they start out with one, it's very easy to start a performance with a bard, which can attract people around a small area. And this is actually a way to provide a convenient distraction if you're trying to, say, sneak someone else into a building. So being able to use that performance in public areas with a bard in-game is absolutely going to be a pretty big boon to someone who might be looking for a creative solution into an interesting problem, which ultimately means that bards can do a lot for you. And how much you get out of them, and especially playing them, is largely down to you and what you intend to use them for. And that, combined with the wealth of role-playing that's going to be available both in this game and 5e as a system, I think bards have a potential to be a great addition to any party, as social situations is what they do best. That said, I like to talk about a few multi-class options at this point in the video, so let's go over that a little bit. A very common one is actually to take a couple levels of Paladin, and especially in Baldur's Gate where the level cap is 12, and bards in particular don't really get much past level 10, it makes a lot of sense to start as a Paladin, take 2 levels of that to get access to their things like Divine Smite and their heavy armor proficiency, and then go the rest into Bard. Because at this point, at the cost of a couple of spells, you're giving yourself access to way more damage via Divine Smite and everything, and protection from heavy armor, especially if you want to build that martially focused Bard who can pass all those charisma checks and everything. And another common one is of course Warlock, as the charisma requirements of both tend to synergize, and a couple of Warlock levels will give you access to all sorts of stuff like their unique Warlock spell slots, even more spells, Eldritch Blast, the invocations to go with it, and it can be a fun way to play a bard in a way that focuses more on the spellcasting while still offering something a little unique. And to leave you with a third option that's kind of fun here is actually to mix bard with a rogue. Rogues tend to focus on dexterity, and typically most bards will as well, and going with just a couple levels of rogue can get you access to more expertise, sneak attack, as well as cunning action, can also be a pretty fun way to play. So bards do have a lot of options in that regard. You could even take a couple levels in sorcerer to grab meta magic, a fighter for their action surge ability. There's a lot of options. But that said, I'd stray away from multi-classing them with things like wizards or druids, as most of what you would go into those classes for, you could just easily grab with magical secrets anyway. And with their differences in ability scores, there's just not a lot of useful things each class would give each other. But nonetheless, there's a few ways to add some versatility to an already very versatile class. And that, combined with a very strong class fantasy, can make bards a lot more interesting than they might initially appear if you really want to dig into what they can do. But that is going to do it for today's video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.